I'm Alex Morgan, 32 years old, and my own father stole my life's work right in front of me and then fired me. Before I tell you how that single act of betrayal led to a $400,000 salary offer and the complete, utter collapse of his multimillion-dollar company, do me a quick favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories can reach. So let's get right into it. Picture the scene. A sterile, glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The air inside is so thick with corporate tension you could cut it with a knife. 23 pairs of eyes are fixated on me. These are my colleagues, the people I've shared coffee with, the people I've worked with day in and day out for the last 9 months. To my right, my younger brother, Victor, is practically vibrating with a smug, self-satisfied energy. He looks like a cat that not only got the cream but has just been handed the deed to the entire dairy farm. And at the head of the table, sitting like a king on a modern art throne, is my father, Richard Morgan, the formidable CEO of Morgan Analytics. For the last hour, I had been meticulously presenting the culmination of a 3-month-long, soul-crushing project. A 53-page audit. This wasn't just any audit. It was my vindication, my undeniable proof that my unconventional, relationship-first approach to client management was a resounding success. The numbers on the screen were stark and powerful. Client retention was up a staggering 37%. Revenue from my managed accounts had swelled by 22%. I had drawn a direct, traceable line from my methods to over $200,000 in additional pure profit income. I had poured every ounce of my professional being into that report. I clicked to the final slide and the presentation ended. The low hum of the projector was the only sound. I looked at my father, my heart pounding, expecting, well, I don't know what I was expecting anymore. A grudging nod? A simple acknowledgement? A flicker of pride in the eyes of the man I had always tried to please? He let that heavy silence stretch, a cruel little smile playing on his lips. Then he stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, commanding the attention of the entire room. "An excellent analysis, Alex," he said, his voice echoing slightly. For one foolish second, my heart leaped. "Thank you for systematizing such an effective methodology." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, a precursor to the guillotine. "From today," he continued, his smile widening into a predatory grin, "this will be the official Morgan method for our company. Victor," he announced, turning to my brother, "will be in charge of implementing it across all our high-level accounts, effective immediately." The bottom fell out of my world. It wasn't just dismissal. It was appropriation. It was theft. He was taking the very essence of my work, my philosophy, and handing it to my greatest rival. He turned his gaze back to me, his eyes as cold and impersonal as a winter sky. "Which means, of course, that your current role is redundant." Redundant. The word, so clinical and corporate, felt like a physical blow. 23 faces stared back at me, a mixture of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity. Victor's grin was now a full-blown, triumphant smirk. In one fell swoop, my father had executed the most brutal corporate heist imaginable, and I was the sole casualty. I felt the blood drain from my face. In that moment, I wasn't his son. I was just a problem that had been efficiently solved. I gathered my papers, my hands surprisingly steady, and walked out of that room without uttering a single word, the sound of my own heartbeat roaring like a freight train in my ears. To truly understand the depth of that betrayal, we need to rewind the clock 9 months. I had just returned to the United States after a 5-year stint in Europe, where I'd cut my teeth working for some of the biggest tech firms in London and Berlin. I didn't come back for the weather. I came back because Morgan Analytics, the consulting firm my grandmother, Eleanor, had painstakingly built from nothing, was dying a slow, painful death. It was the family business, our legacy, and it was bleeding clients. They had lost nearly half their customer base in just 2 years. Walking back through those office doors was like stepping into a museum of corporate stagnation. The same beige walls, the same worn-out gray carpet, the same software that looked ancient by today's standards. My father, Richard, had taken the helm as CEO after my grandmother retired a decade ago. He ran the company with the ruthless efficiency of a machine and the emotional intelligence of a rock. To him, clients were not partners. They were assets on a balance sheet. Relationships were measured in renewal rates and dollars, not in trust and loyalty. Humanity was an inefficiency to be minimized. He gave me the title of Customer Relations Manager, a role that sounded important but was stripped of any real authority. It was a token gesture, a way to keep me in the fold but firmly under his control. The real power lay with my younger brother, Victor, the director of operations. Victor had always been the golden child, the one my father and my stepmother, Vivian, showered with praise. He possessed my father's ambition but lacked his discipline, carrying himself with an air of unearned entitlement. He viewed my return not as a lifeline for the company, but as a direct threat to his eventual inheritance. My first assignment was a deep dive into the client files. It was a digital graveyard of dead relationships. Each entry was a cold, transactional log, call made to discuss Q3 contract, follow-up scheduled for November 15th, awaiting signature. There was no life, no personality, no story. I couldn't tell you a single thing about these clients as people. And that, I knew, was the root of the problem. We weren't losing them over price. We were losing them over indifference. They left because they felt invisible. So, I decided to do something my father would consider corporate heresy. I started treating them like human beings. My first real test was Vernon Hutchcraft, the 58-year-old owner of a mid-sized manufacturing company. His file was marked with red flags: abrupt, demanding, high maintenance. I initiated a video call, and sure enough, he was all business, his tone clipped and impatient. But as he spoke, my eyes were drawn to a framed photo on the credenza behind him. It was a beautiful, aging golden retriever. During a pause in his spiel about logistics and KPIs, I jumped in. "That's a handsome dog you've got there, Vernon." He stopped mid-sentence, thrown off. His entire demeanor shifted. The hard lines on his face softened. "That's Murphy," he said, his voice dropping an octave, filled with a warmth that was completely absent before. "My best friend. He's not doing so well these days. The vet says it's his hips. Old age is a cruel thing." For the next 20 minutes, the topic of quarterly reports was forgotten. We talked about Murphy. We talked about the silent companionship of a loyal dog, the pain of watching a friend get old, the debate over expensive vet treatments. By the end of the call, Vernon wasn't an abrupt client. He was a worried man who deeply loved his dog. The following day, I spent my lunch break researching new therapies for canine arthritis and emailed him a link to a promising clinical trial. His reply was short, just 2 words: "Thank you, Alex." But in the world of corporate communication, it felt like a hug. Then there was Constance Farweather, a razor-sharp woman in her 60s who ran a thriving textile empire. Her file painted her as a ruthless negotiator. During one of our calls, I noticed a vintage, well-worn cookbook on her shelf, its spine cracked from years of use. It was a classic of traditional Southern cooking. "You know, my own grandmother had that exact cookbook," I commented. "I can still taste her pecan pie." She swore the secret was a little bit of bourbon in the crust. Constance's professional mask vanished. She broke into a genuine, heartfelt laugh. "Bourbon? Of course. Your grandmother was a wise woman. Mine swore by lard." She lit up, her eyes sparkling as she talked about her passion for preserving old family recipes, how she saw food as the thread that wove generations together. We spent the next half-hour trading stories about our grandmothers. I learned that what she valued most wasn't cutting costs, but preserving tradition and quality, a value she felt her modern suppliers no longer understood. And so it went. With Roderick Yates, the quiet owner of a chain of niche bookstores, I discovered a shared passion for classic pulp detective novels. Our business calls would often start with a 5-minute debate on whether Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe was the tougher detective. This was my strategy. It wasn't about wasting time. It was about investing it. I was building fortresses of trust, one genuine human connection at a time. Predictably, my family saw it as a 5-alarm fire. Victor became my personal watchdog. He'd monitor my call logs, his eyes scanning for any call that went over the efficient 10-minute mark. Then he'd scurry off to my father's office, report in hand. "Dad, you need to see this. Alex spent 25 minutes on a non-billable call with Hutchcraft yesterday." The main topic of conversation, according to the log Alex filled out, was a dog. My father would summon me to his office, his face a granite mask of disappointment. "Alex, what is this nonsense? We are running a business, not a therapy practice. Stick to the key performance indicators. Your performance will be judged on renewals and call efficiency. Time is money. The KPIs are the problem, Dad." I'd argue, my frustration mounting. "They don't measure the most important metric of all, loyalty. You can't put a number on trust." He would just shake his head, a gesture of complete dismissal. That's the kind of soft, emotional thinking that got us into this mess. The world runs on numbers, son. It's time you learned that. My stepmother, Vivian, was the master of fanning these flames. At our tense family dinners, she would play the concerned matriarch. "Richard, darling," she'd say, placing her perfectly manicured hand on his arm, "I'm just so worried about Alex. He seems to be struggling to adapt. Perhaps Victor should take on a more supervisory role with his accounts, just to provide some guidance and ensure our clients are getting the professional attention they expect." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to elevate her own son at my expense. The only sanctuary I had was my grandmother, Eleanor. I visited her every Sunday, and her quiet, sunlit living room became my refuge. At 85, she was still as sharp as a diamond, and though she was retired, she saw everything. "I saw the preliminary retention numbers for your portfolio, Alex," she told me one afternoon, her eyes twinkling over the rim of her teacup. "Remarkable. Your father hasn't seen figures like that in years. He thinks I'm a liability," I confessed, the weight of the week slumping my shoulders. She set her cup down with a soft click. "Your father is a builder. He's brilliant at it. He builds things with rules and numbers and logic. But you, Alex, you're an architect. You build things with people, with empathy, with trust. They are two fundamentally different languages, and he is afraid of yours because he doesn't speak it." She leaned forward, her expression turning serious. "But you must be careful. A man like your father, when he feels threatened or proven wrong, does not fight fair. He will see your success not as a victory for the company, but as a challenge to his authority. Always have an escape route prepared." I nodded, but I didn't truly understand the gravity of her warning. I thought it was a metaphor. I didn't realize she was giving me a literal blueprint for survival. The tension finally boiled over a month later. On the recommendation of Victor and Vivian, my father officially reassigned 2 of my most promising and hard-won accounts to Victor's direct management. The official reason was to balance the workload and leverage Victor's operational expertise. We both knew it was a lie. It was a public slap in the face. It was a clear, unambiguous message. You are not the future of this company. He is. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a debate over business strategy anymore. This was a war, and I was determined to win it, naive to how devastating the casualties would be. The following 6 months were a period of clandestine warfare, fought not in trenches but in emails, phone calls, and the subtle currents of corporate politics. While Victor was busy blasting his newly acquired accounts with generic, one-size-fits-all corporate newsletters, I went deeper with mine. I wasn't just a consultant. I became an indispensable resource. I remembered the anniversary of a client's company launch and sent a thoughtful note. I sent a condolence basket when another client's mother passed away. I connected a client in manufacturing with another in logistics, creating a new business opportunity for them both. I was weaving a web of loyalty so strong that my father's old-world tactics couldn't hope to break it. And then the numbers came in. Hard, cold, irrefutable numbers. The kind my father claimed to worship. My portfolio of clients, the ones I had nurtured from the brink, showed a 37% higher retention rate compared to the rest of the company. That alone was stunning. But there was more. The revenue from my accounts had grown by an average of 22%. Why? Because they trusted me. They expanded their contracts, integrating our analytical services deeper into their core operations. They weren't just buying a service, they were investing in a partnership. My soft approach was producing the hardest results imaginable. The explosion came at the annual North American Business Leaders Gala. It was a suffocatingly formal event, a sea of black ties and forced smiles. I was standing by the bar, trying to look inconspicuous, when a booming voice cut through the murmur. "Alex Morgan, there you are." It was Gideon Ashworth. Gideon was the CEO of a massive logistics firm, one of our oldest and most prestigious partners. He was a titan of the industry, a man whose casual remarks could move stock prices. He clapped me on the shoulder with a hand the size of a baseball glove. My father and Victor, standing nearby, immediately stiffened, their radar on high alert. "I have to tell you," Gideon bellowed, ensuring everyone in a 10-foot radius could hear. "Your client Vernon Hutchcraft won't shut up about you. He cornered me for 20 minutes talking about how you're the first consultant in his entire career who actually gives a damn about his business beyond the invoice." I could feel the temperature drop. My father's smile became a thin, tight line. Victor looked like he'd just bitten into a raw onion. Gideon, oblivious or perhaps not caring, turned directly to my father. "Richard, you've got a damn superstar here. This human-centric approach he's pioneering. It's not just a nice idea, it's revolutionary. It is the future of this industry." He then delivered the killing blow. "We're so impressed with the new level of partnership that we're looking to increase our contract with Morgan Analytics by 30% next quarter. And I want to be clear, we're doing it because of the culture of trust your son is building." The praise was a tactical nuke detonated in the middle of our family's Cold War. It was public. It was from an unimpeachable source. And it was directed at me. My father had been completely and utterly upstaged. His own philosophy had been implicitly declared obsolete. The car ride home was a symphony of suffocating silence. The very next morning, the summons came. "My office. Now." This was when he unveiled his masterpiece of passive aggression. "The board has some concerns," he began, using the royal we that always meant I. "They are intrigued by your recent results, but they find your methods to be erratic, unpredictable. They're worried it's not scalable. They want a full, comprehensive audit of your entire process, from start to finish." He slid a thick, menacingly heavy binder across the polished surface of his desk. It was a project brief from hell. He wanted me to document every single principle, every tactic, every interaction. I was to create a step-by-step playbook, a how-to manual for faking sincerity. It was an impossibly colossal task, a bureaucratic labyrinth designed to take hundreds of hours, to bury me alive under a mountain of paperwork. "You want me to conduct an audit on myself?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I want you to systematize your success," he corrected, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, "so that anyone can replicate it, so that the success is tied to the company, not to a single individual." The message was crystal clear. He wanted to distill my personal touch into an impersonal formula, something he could own, control, and hand off to his preferred successor, Victor. It was a punishment cleverly disguised as a high-level strategic project. That evening, at a family dinner that felt more like a parole hearing, Vivian played her part to perfection. "Oh, I think it's a truly brilliant idea, Richard, darling," she cooed, placing her hand on his arm. "And it's such a vital project. While Alex is focused on this, perhaps it would be fiscally prudent to temporarily cut the budget for his department's non-essential activities. You know, the travel, the client entertainment, the things that take up so much time. Just until the audit is complete, of course." It was a pincer movement. My father was burying me in work, and she was cutting off my resources. They were systematically trying to dismantle everything I had built. I felt cornered, outmaneuvered. But then, a lifeline appeared from an unexpected direction. My phone rang. It was a London number. "Am I speaking with Alex Morgan?" a crisp, intelligent voice asked. "This is he." "Alex, my name is Jessica Chen. We worked together briefly at Axon Corp years ago. I'm not sure if you remember me." I did remember her. Jessica was fiercely smart and ambitious. We'd been friendly rivals, part of the same analyst team. Jessica, of course. It's great to hear from you. What's going on? I'll get straight to the point. I'm a co-founder at a new firm here, Marlowe Partners. My CEO and I have been making some waves, and we keep hearing your name pop up. Gideon Ashworth, in particular, sings your praises, says you're changing the game. I was stunned into silence. We're building a different kind of company, Alex, she continued. A company founded on the very principles you seem to be fighting for. We believe empathy isn't a soft skill. It's a core asset. We're expanding and we're looking for leaders. Would you ever be open to a serious conversation about your future? The offer hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. Promotion, a real leadership role, a company that actually wanted what I had to offer. I'm flattered, Jessica. Honestly, but this is the family business. I feel a certain obligation. I understand loyalty, she said, a hint of understanding in her voice. But loyalty has to go both ways. The offer stands. Keep my number, just in case you ever decide your talents are being wasted. I hung up, my mind reeling. It was an escape hatch, a golden parachute, but I wasn't ready to pull the cord. Not yet. I had to see this through. I had to prove myself here, to him. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that another, far more significant call was being made that very week. In her quiet, sun-drenched study, my grandmother Eleanor, her face a mask of grim determination, pulled out an old leather-bound address book. She found a name and dialed. Jessica Chen, please, she said to the assistant who answered. There was a brief pause. Jessica, hello? My name is Eleanor Morgan. You and I have never met, but I believe we have a mutual and pressing interest in the future of my grandson, Alex. She saw the chessboard more clearly than any of us, and she was already moving her pieces into position for the endgame. Back in the lion's den, I stared at the monstrous audit binder on my desk. It was a mountain. It was unfair. It was a trap designed to make me fail. But as I looked at it, a cold, hard resolve settled in my bones. They wanted a report. They wanted proof. They wanted a system. Fine. I would give them a system so brilliant, so thorough, and so utterly undeniable that it would be the last word in this long, silent war. I picked up the binder, walked back into my father's office, and placed it on his desk. I'll do it, I said, my voice as steady as steel. And the numbers will speak for themselves. It was a declaration. He just didn't realize who I was declaring war on. The next 3 months were a descent into a special kind of corporate hell. My life became a monotonous loop of fluorescent lights, the bitter taste of stale coffee, and the relentless, hypnotic clicking of my keyboard. I became a ghost in my own office, a phantom haunting the 14th floor. I arrived before the sun was up, my shadow long in the empty hallways, and I left long after the city lights had painted streaks across my office window. My world, once filled with human interaction and connection, shrank to the suffocating confines of my desk, to the endless, unforgiving columns of data in my spreadsheets. My father's strategy was, in one respect, a resounding success. I was completely and utterly isolated. He and Victor had made certain of it. My colleagues, once friendly, now offered only curt nods in the hallway. They were smart enough to know that fraternizing with the man under the CEO's personal microscope was a career-limiting move. Victor, for his part, reveled in my exile. He would make a point of walking past my glass-walled office, a condescending smirk playing on his lips, often pausing just long enough to make sure I saw him before swaggering off to a client lunch he'd be sure to mention later. They thought they were burying me in bureaucracy. They thought they were breaking my spirit with endless, mind-numbing work. But they fundamentally misunderstood what I was doing in that solitary office. I wasn't just crunching numbers. I was an archaeologist of relationships, carefully excavating the story behind every data point. This 15-minute phone call wasn't just a time entry. It was the precise moment Constance Farweather let her guard down and shared a story about her grandmother's pecan pie. This email wasn't just a routine follow-up. It was the link I sent to Vernon Hutchcraft about a new arthritis therapy for his beloved dog, Murphy. I was meticulously weaving the threads of genuine human connection directly into the cold, hard fabric of the data, creating a tapestry so rich and detailed that they wouldn't be able to dismiss it as soft or unscientific. But the pressure, the sheer weight of the task combined with the isolation was immense. There were nights I would just stare at the screen, the words and numbers blurring into an incoherent soup, a crushing wave of doubt washing over me. There was one night in particular, about 2 months into this ordeal, that I came perilously close to shattering. It was almost 2 a.m. I was running on nothing but caffeine and stubbornness. I had just finished a tense call with a client who was, to put it mildly, unhappy. Victor had been managing his account for a month, and the client was furious. "He sounds like a robot reading from a script, Alex," the man had vented. "He asked me about my daughter's college applications, but he called her by the wrong name. What in the hell is going on over there?" I hung up the phone and dropped my head into my hands, the rough texture of my palms pressing into my tired eyes. The absolute futility of my struggle hit me like a physical blow. What was I even doing? I was torturing myself to prove a point to a man who was determined not to see it, in a company that was actively sabotaging my efforts. The escape hatch Jessica Chen had offered me felt incredibly tempting. One phone call and this could all be over. A new job, a massive salary increase, a promotion, respect. I actually pulled out my phone and looked at her contact information. My thumb hovered over the call button. I could just disappear, leave them all to the mess they had created. But then I thought of my grandmother's words. "He is afraid of your language because he doesn't speak it." Giving up now meant letting him be right. It meant admitting my language, my philosophy, was meaningless. With a deep, shaky breath, I dialed the only other number that offered me any solace. "Alex, is everything all right?" My grandmother's voice was thick with sleep, but it instantly sharpened with concern. "I don't know if I can do this, Grandma," I admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush of exhaustion and despair. "It's too much. The walls are closing in. Maybe Dad is right. Maybe I am just wasting my time. Maybe this whole idea of business with a soul is just a naive fantasy." There was a significant pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of her taking a deep, measured breath. "No," she said, her voice suddenly infused with a steely resolve that cut through the static of my self-pity. "You listen to me, Alexander Morgan. Your father is a builder. He builds with numbers and rules. You are an architect. You build with people and trust. He has tasked you with writing a dictionary for a language he doesn't understand. Don't just define the words for him. Use them to show him how to build a cathedral." She paused, letting the metaphor sink in. "He wants a system he can replicate? Fine. You will give him a system so flawlessly detailed, so exquisitely crafted, and so intrinsically tied to the very concept of sincerity, that it is utterly worthless in the hands of anyone who does not possess it. Do you understand me, Alex?" Her words were not a comforting hug. They were a call to arms. They were a strategy. She wasn't telling me it would be okay. She was telling me how to win. The fog of despair in my brain began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear focus. "Yes, Grandma," I said, a new fire kindling in the pit of my stomach. "I understand perfectly." From that night forward, my work took on a new, sharper purpose. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was forging a weapon. I was building a monument to my philosophy, a fortress of facts so impenetrable that no one could ever tear it down. Meanwhile, Victor's paranoia and jealousy were making him sloppy. He couldn't understand how my client satisfaction rates remained sky-high, even while I was supposedly buried and neutralized. He started making mistakes. I'd come into my office in the morning and notice small things out of place. A pen moved on my desk, a file folder slightly askew. He was snooping, desperately hunting for a mistake, a shortcut, any piece of ammunition he could use against me. One afternoon, I deliberately left my workstation and watched from down the hall. Sure enough, within minutes, Victor slipped into my office and tried to access my locked computer. He was hunting for a weapon, but his desperation was making him reckless. I made a quiet note of the date and time. I documented everything. I put the final period on the final sentence of the report on a Tuesday morning. It was 53 pages of dense, detailed, and undeniable proof. It was bound in a simple, professional black cover. It was, without a doubt, the best and most important work I had ever done. It was my heart and soul quantified and cross-referenced. I walked to my father's office, the report feeling heavy in my hand, a symbol of the last 3 months of my life. I placed it squarely in the center of his massive desk. "It's done," I said. He picked it up, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes that I had actually completed the Herculean task. "Good," he said, not even bothering to open it. "I'll schedule a meeting for all department heads on Friday. You can present your findings." I should have seen it then. It was never about the data in the report. It was always about the stage. And he was getting ready to set it for a public execution, with me as the guest of honor. Friday dawned cold and gray, the sky over the city a bruised, unforgiving canvas. The conference room was packed to capacity. My father had summoned not just my department, but all department heads. The stakes had been raised. The audience was larger, more influential. The air was electric with a mixture of curiosity and dread. My father sat at the head of the table, the very picture of executive authority, a modern-day king about to preside over a public trial. To his right, his chosen heir, Victor, sat with a smug, predatory grin plastered on his face. He thought he knew exactly how this spectacle was going to end. And he was right about the ending. He was just disastrously wrong about who was going to win. I stood at the podium, the first slide of my 53-page report glowing on the massive screen behind me. A hush fell over the room. I began to speak, my voice calm, steady, and professional. I walked them through it slide by meticulous slide. I didn't plead or pontificate. I didn't use emotional language. I didn't have to. The numbers were my legions, and they marched across the screen in perfect, undeniable formation. The graphs showing the steep, upward trajectory of client retention in my portfolio. The charts detailing the 22% surge in revenue from existing accounts, a direct result of expanded contracts and deeper integration. The pie charts illustrating that my small handful of accounts were now responsible for a disproportionately large share of the company's profit margin. Then came the qualitative data, the direct quotes from client satisfaction surveys. I let our clients speak for me. Vernon Hutchcraft. For the first time in 15 years, I feel like Morgan Analytics sees my business as more than a line on their revenue sheet. Alex gets it. Constance Farweather. The level of personal attention and genuine understanding of my brand's values is unprecedented. The trust is back. Gideon Ashworth. The strategic insights provided by Alex Morgan have been invaluable, fostering a level of partnership we have not experienced previously. I laid out the entire Morgan method, just as my father had demanded. But I did it exactly as my grandmother had advised. I didn't just provide a checklist. I framed the entire system around a core philosophy. I showed, with data, that the highest value interactions occurred when the conversation veered into the personal. I demonstrated that the key to upselling wasn't a hard pitch, but a deep understanding of a client's personal and professional anxieties. I had created a system, yes, but it was a system powered by sincerity. It was a system that couldn't be faked. It was a system designed to fail in the hands of a phony. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a silence of comprehension. I had presented a flawless, airtight case. I had taken an impossible, punitive task and turned it into a masterclass. I looked directly at my father, my expression neutral, and waited. He let that silence stretch, savoring the moment, the absolute power he held. Then he slowly rose to his feet, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. He walked over to the podium, coming to stand beside me, a gesture that, for a fleeting moment, looked like unity. "An excellent analysis, Alex," he said, his voice deceptively calm, projecting to every corner of the room. My heart, That foolish, stubborn organ hammered against my ribs. Thank you for systematizing such an effective methodology. He turned to face the assembled department heads, the jury for this trial. From today, he announced, his voice ringing with a newfound, triumphant authority, this will be the official Morgan method for our company. My stomach turned to a block of ice. I saw it coming. I saw the blade as it fell. Victor, he said, gesturing to my brother, who puffed up his chest, soaking in the reflected glory, will be in charge of a new elite client strategy division. He will be responsible for implementing this new method across all of our high-level accounts, effective immediately. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the room. It was a move of such stunning, brazen cruelty that even these seasoned corporate veterans were shocked. He wasn't just ignoring my success. He was stealing it, right in front of everyone, and handing the keys to the kingdom to my chief rival, his golden child. He turned his gaze back to me, the final, killing blow delivered with a chilling, almost pitying smile. Which means, of course, that your current role, and for that matter your entire department, is redundant. Redundant, fired, discarded, erased. The wave of humiliation was so intense it was a physical force, pressing in on me from all sides. The stunned and pitying looks from my colleagues, Victor's undisguised, triumphant sneer, my father's cold, dismissive eyes. He hadn't just defeated me in a corporate battle. He had tried to annihilate me, to strip me of my work, my identity, and my dignity in the most public way imaginable. I stood there for a long second, the world muted, the only sound the roaring of my own blood in my ears. I felt a strange and sudden calm. The shock was so profound, so absolute, that it pushed me through the pain and out the other side into a place of icy clarity. I mechanically gathered my personal notebook and pen from the podium. My hands were perfectly steady. I didn't look at my father. I didn't look at my brother. I didn't look at anyone. I turned and walked out of that conference room, my back straight, my head held high. I walked past my office, not even glancing inside. I walked straight to the elevator, my face a blank, unreadable mask. My silence was my only response. It was the only weapon I had left. I didn't go home. I didn't go to a bar. I went to a small, anonymous coffee shop a few blocks away, a place where no one knew my name. I sat in a booth in the back, the adrenaline from the confrontation slowly draining away, leaving a hollow, aching cold in its place. He thought he had won. He thought he held all the cards. He had the company, the title, the board's tacit approval, and my 53-page report sitting on his desk. But he didn't have my phone, and he didn't have my reputation. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first one that felt like it truly reached my lungs. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. My finger hovered over a name, Jessica Chin. My grandmother's words echoed in my head. Always have an escape route prepared. I pressed the call button. Marlowe Partners, Jessica Chun speaking. Her voice was a welcome sound, crisp, professional, and a world away from the viper pit I had just left. Jessica, I said, my own voice steady, surprising even myself. It's Alex Morgan. I'm out. I'm free. There was a beat of silence on her end, and then a soft exhale. Alex, I'm sorry to hear it went down that way, but I can't say I'm surprised. Are you okay? I will be, I said, a sense of resolve hardening my voice. The conversation we had. Is it still on the table? I could practically hear her smile through the phone. The conversation is over, Alex. The job is yours if you want it. We've already created the position. Head of Client Strategy. We were just waiting for you to be ready. I closed my eyes, the tension in my shoulders releasing for the first time in months. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. What are the terms? The official offer letter will be in your inbox before you finish your coffee. But the headline is this: a starting salary of $400,000 a year, a significant promotion to a senior leadership role, and a generous grant of company equity. We're not just hiring an employee, Alex. We are investing in a partner. Salary, promotion, equity, partner. The words were a healing balm on my raw, wounded pride. It was a level of respect and compensation I would have waited 20 years to even approach at Morgan Analytics. Yes, I said, my voice clear and strong, without a hint of hesitation. I accept. After I hung up, a fire I didn't know I had began to burn. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to win. I scrolled to another name in my contacts. Vernon Hutchcraft. Vernon, it's Alex Morgan. Alex, just the man I wanted to talk to. This new fellow your father assigned to my account, your brother, Victor, he's a piece of work. Called me yesterday and asked how Murphy the dog was doing. Sounded like he was reading it off a teleprompter. Is everything all right over there? I took a steadying breath. Vernon, I'm no longer with Morgan Analytics as of this morning. I just wanted to call you personally and thank you for your partnership and trust over these past months. It meant a great deal to me. There was a long, thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. Where are you going, son? He asked, his voice low and serious. A firm called Marlowe Partners. Then I guess Marlowe Partners is about to get a new client, he said, his voice firm, without a second of hesitation. Have your new people send my people the paperwork. My business goes where the trust is, and right now the trust is with you. I hung up, a slow, determined smile spreading across my face for the first time that day. I made 2 more calls. One to Constance Farweather. One to Roderick Yates. The conversations were nearly identical. My father thought he had stolen my work. He was wrong. My work wasn't a 53-page report that could be copied. My work was the trust one had built, phone call by phone call, conversation by conversation. And that was an asset he could never, ever touch. The heist had failed spectacularly. He just didn't know it yet. The first tremor of the earthquake I had set in motion hit Morgan Analytics less than 24 hours after my departure. It didn't come as a dramatic shout, but as a cold, clinical email. Vernon Hutchcraft's corporate lawyer sent a formal notice to my father's office, terminating their multi-year, 6-figure contract, effective immediately. The stated reason was a carefully worded legal phrase: a material change in senior management and a subsequent and severe decline in the quality of strategic service. It was a professional, surgically precise, and devastatingly effective blow. But the real day-to-day drama was unfolding inside the company walls. Victor, puffed up with his unearned promotion and armed with the Bible of my stolen report, set out to implement his version of the Morgan method. It wasn't just a failure. It was a train wreck in slow motion, and the entire department had front-row seats. He tried to replicate my actions, but he was like an actor reading a script in a language he didn't understand. He had the words, but none of the music. His attempts at building rapport were so clumsy and insincere they bordered on the absurd. The story that quickly became legendary among the staff was his call to Constance Farweather. Reading directly from my detailed notes, he had apparently said, with all the warmth of a recorded announcement, "So, I see here that you are a fan of traditional Southern cooking. How's that going for you?" Constance, a woman who had built an empire on quality and authenticity and could spot a phony from a mile away, was not amused. Her reply, recounted with glee by a junior account manager who had been forced to listen in, was dripping with ice. "Young man," she had said, her voice dangerously quiet, "my passion for my family's heritage is not a data point on your customer service checklist. Do not ever presume to speak to me about it again. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a real business to run." Then she hung up. The tragic irony was that my report, the very tool my father had intended for Victor to use, was too good. It was too detailed. It didn't just say, build relationships. It highlighted the critical importance of genuine connection. It specified that remembering Vernon's dog was named Murphy and that he suffered from arthritis was the key, not just knowing he had a dog. When Victor tried to deploy these personal details, he sounded less like a trusted partner and more like a creepy stalker who had just read a private file. He was actively demonstrating the very thing my method was designed to eliminate: the feeling that the client was nothing more than a collection of data to be exploited. My departure, followed by the immediate and noisy complaints from major clients, sent a shockwave of fear and uncertainty through the department. The 23 people who had witnessed my public execution were now watching the executioner bleed. They saw Victor, flustered and increasingly angry, failing to command an ounce of the respect or results I had. They heard the phones ringing with confused, annoyed, or outright furious clients. The absolute loyalty my father had always commanded, a loyalty built on fear and authority, began to crumble into dust. The defining moment of this initial collapse came a week later. My grandmother, Eleanor, who hadn't attended a board meeting in 5 years, invoked her right as a founder and a primary shareholder to call an emergency session. My father, I was told later, was blindsided. He had assumed her power was merely symbolic, a relic of a bygone era. He was wrong. She walked into that boardroom, a small, elegant woman of 85, her posture perfect, her gaze sharp and unwavering. She didn't shout. She didn't make accusations. She simply asked questions, each one a carefully aimed shot at the foundation of my father's authority. "Richard," she began, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the tense silence. "I see from the preliminary report that Vernon Hutchcraft has terminated his contract. He was one of our most loyal clients for over 15 years. Can you explain this sudden departure?" My father, caught off guard, stammered something about unforeseen market fluctuations and aggressive competitor pricing. Eleanor didn't even blink. "Interesting, because Constance Farweather has officially put her 7-figure contract renewal on hold, pending a performance review. And Gideon Ashworth, your oldest partner, called me personally this morning to express his grave concerns about the new direction of client management. He used the word amateurish. This doesn't sound like market fluctuations, Richard. This sounds like a fire that seems to have started the very day my grandson was forced out of this company." She then turned her cool, penetrating gaze on Victor, who shrank in his chair. "I understand you are now in charge of these critical accounts, Victor. A significant promotion. Please enlighten the board. What is your strategy for retaining them?" Victor, wilting under the combined glare of the board and his formidable grandmother, fumbled for an answer. I'm implementing the Morgan method. It's a very detailed system." Eleanor cut him off, her voice sharp as glass. "No, you are trying to read from a script. Alex was the method. You cannot systematize a soul, Richard. You cannot turn sincerity into a checklist. And that is a fundamental lesson that you and your chosen successor have spectacularly failed to learn." She let her words hang in the air, a damning indictment delivered in the heart of the company my father now controlled. She wasn't just defending me anymore. She was fighting for the soul and legacy of the company she had poured her life into building. The power dynamic in that room had fundamentally and irrevocably shifted. My father was no longer the untouchable king on his throne. He was just a failing CEO with a full-blown crisis on his hands, a crisis born entirely of his own arrogance and pride. The aftershocks were just beginning, and they were about to bring the whole building down. 3 months later, the view from my window was of a different world. My new office at Marlowe Partners was on the 20th floor, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the sprawling city. The space itself was a metaphor for the change in my life. It was open, filled with natural light, buzzing with the energy of collaboration. Whiteboards were covered in scribbled ideas, not rigid KPIs. It was everything Morgan Analytics wasn't. It was vibrant, forward-thinking, and alive. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a partner. Jessica and Marcus, the CEO, had been true to their word. They had given me complete autonomy, a generous budget, and the trust to build my own team from the ground up. I handpicked 2 of my most talented and loyal former colleagues from Morgan Analytics, individuals who had seen the writing on the wall and had reached out to me. We were building something special, a division founded on the core belief that business was, at its heart, a human endeavor. And my clients, my network, had become the foundation of our new success. After Vernon, Constance and Roderick led the charge. A steady stream had followed. As their contracts at Morgan Analytics came up for renewal, they walked. They didn't just walk. They ran. They ran from a sinking ship into the waiting lifeboat we had built. By the end of the first quarter, 6 of Morgan's top 20 most profitable clients were now Marlowe Partners flagship accounts. We hadn't poached a single one. We had simply opened our doors, and they had come flooding in, seeking the respect and partnership they had been denied. My starting salary, which had seemed so astronomical, was already looking like a bargain for the firm. Meanwhile, back at the crumbling fortress of Morgan Analytics, the ship was taking on water fast. The internal atmosphere, I heard from my old colleagues, had turned toxic. My father, consumed by a furious, stubborn denial, doubled down on his old, failing methods. More pressure, more micromanagement, more threats. He was trying to fix a drought by yelling at the clouds, and his best people were fleeing the heat. The final ugly implosion of my old life, the one that severed the ties for good, came during a desperate last-ditch weekend family meeting called by my father at his house. The company was hemorrhaging money. He was facing a full-blown investor revolt, orchestrated with quiet precision by his own mother. He was looking for a scapegoat, a solution, a way to stop the bleeding. But all he found was more poison. He started, predictably, by blaming me. My betrayal, my disloyalty, my theft of his clients. Then his rage, finding no purchase on an absent target, turned on the one closest to him. Victor, you were supposed to handle this, he roared, his face purple with fury. I gave you the promotion. I gave you the playbook, and you've sat there and lost us millions of dollars. Victor, who had been simmering in a stew of resentment, fear, and inadequacy for months, finally snapped. The golden child shattered into a million pieces. Me? He shrieked, his voice thin and high-pitched with panic. You're blaming me? You set me up to fail. It was his personal network, his relationships. You can't copy that from a report. I did everything I could. Your best wasn't good enough, my father bellowed, advancing on him. I was trying to protect the company. Victor shot back, taking a step back, his face pale with sweat. I was even talking to other firms. I was trying to see if there was a merger opportunity, a way to save our inheritance before it was all gone. The room went deathly silent. Vivian, my stepmother, stared at him, her mouth agape in horror. You did what? My father's voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper that was far more terrifying than his yelling. I had to explore our options, Victor stammered, realizing far too late the magnitude of his confession. You went behind my back to our competitors? What Victor, in his sniveling self-pity, framed as exploring options, was, in fact, an act of outright corporate espionage. In his panic, convinced the company was doomed and that he would be the primary scapegoat, he had secretly reached out to a direct rival. He had offered them sensitive inside information, Morgan Analytics' complete client list, our current financials, our contract vulnerabilities, in a desperate bid to secure a cushy executive job for himself. He was trying to sell his own family, his own legacy, down the river to save his own skin. An internal investigation, prompted by a discreet tip-off from that same rival firm, would later uncover the damning emails on his work computer. He had signed his own corporate death warrant. That was the end of Victor. But the cascade of betrayals wasn't over. Vivian, the woman who had built her entire identity, her entire world, around being the wife of a powerful CEO and the mother of his chosen heir, saw the writing on the wall. The power, the money, the social standing, it was all evaporating before her eyes. With Victor disgraced and Richard's control shattered, her position in the family hierarchy was gone. A week later, she packed her bags and informed my father that their marriage was over. Her divorce lawyer, I later heard, was famously aggressive. She was determined to get her share before the entire enterprise sank into bankruptcy. The final, definitive nail in the coffin was hammered in by my grandmother. At the next emergency board meeting, she laid out the stark, undeniable reality. The company was on the verge of insolvency. It had lost the trust of its clients, its best employees, and the market. Its once proud reputation was in tatters. Then, with the cold, quiet precision of a master chess player, she delivered her checkmate. I can no longer stand by and watch the company I poured my life into be driven into the ground by arrogance and incompetence, she announced to the stunned board members. Therefore, I have exercised my rights as a founder and have leveraged my remaining shares, along with the proxy support from a majority of other concerned shareholders, to force a vote of no confidence in our current CEO. And just like that, with a quiet vote, it was over. My father was unceremoniously ousted from the company he had commandeered from his own mother. To avoid a complete and humiliating collapse, the board had no choice but to accept a humiliatingly lowball merger offer from a larger, more aggressive competitor. The name Morgan Analytics, once a symbol of quality and integrity, would cease to exist. In the span of a few short months, my father had lost everything that mattered to him. His company, his power, his wife, and the loyalty of both of his sons. All because he couldn't bear to see one of them succeed on his own terms. 2 years passed. 2 years of intense, challenging, and deeply rewarding work. 2 years of building something from the ground up, not with the cold bricks of fear and authority, but with the warm, sturdy mortar of trust and mutual respect. Marlowe Partners had soared. We were the talk of the industry, the case study everyone was analyzing. Our philosophy, the one my father had so contemptuously dismissed as soft and idealistic, was now our biggest competitive advantage. I was a full equity partner, a leader in a company that I was genuinely, profoundly proud of. My work had meaning. The invitation to be the keynote speaker at the annual North American Business Leaders Gala felt like a fitting, full-circle moment. It was the very same event, in the very same grand ballroom, where Gideon Ashworth's public praise had inadvertently lit the fuse that had blown my old life to smithereens. As I stood on that brightly lit stage, looking out at a sea of hundreds of faces, the titans of my industry, the up-and-comers, the analysts, I didn't talk about disruption or synergy or any of the other empty buzzwords that usually filled these halls. I talked about trust. I talked about how the most valuable assets in any 21st century business, loyalty, creativity, passion, could never be quantified on a balance sheet or managed on a spreadsheet. I told them that in an age of automation, our humanity was our last and greatest strategic advantage. The applause at the end was long and generous. As it faded and I walked off the stage, a crowd of people moving toward me with handshakes and business cards, I saw him, my father. He was standing near the back of the auditorium, alone, a solitary figure in a sea of networking professionals. He looked diminished. The towering, arrogant confidence that had been his defining characteristic was gone, replaced by the weary, stooped shoulders of a man who had lost too many wars, most of them with himself. He wasn't a king in exile. He was just an old man in a suit that seemed a little too big for him now. Our eyes met across the crowded room. For a brief, hot second, I felt a familiar flash of the old anger, the sting of the old hurt. But it was distant now, a faint echo from a former life. It was quickly replaced by something I hadn't expected to feel. A quiet, somber wave of pity. He made his way through the bustling crowd toward me, his steps hesitant, uncertain. He stopped a few feet away, his hands shoved awkwardly into the pockets of his trousers, a gesture I'd never seen from him before. He had always been a man who took up space, who gestured with authority. Now he seemed to be trying to shrink. "I saw your name on the program," he said, his voice raspy, unfamiliar. "I wanted to hear what you had to say." "Hello, Dad," I replied, my voice even. He looked down at the polished floor, then back up at me, his eyes clouded with a thick, heavy layer of regret. It was a look I had never seen on his face before, and it was startling. "That report you wrote," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The 53-page one. I read it again after everything fell apart. Kept it. I read it about a dozen times. I finally understood what you were trying to tell me." He took a shaky breath, the effort seeming to cost him something. "I should have listened to you. You were right, son. About the clients. About the business. About everything. I was wrong." The 3 words I had spent my entire life yearning to hear. I was wrong. They were finally spoken, not in anger, not in defeat, but in a quiet, cavernous hallway filled with strangers. And they didn't bring the surge of triumphant victory I had always imagined. They just felt incredibly, deeply sad. The cost of those 3 words had been a family, a legacy. I nodded slowly, accepting the apology for what it was. A beginning, a crack of light in a room that had been dark for a very long time. I know, I said softly. There was nothing else to say. The damage was done, the history written. We couldn't go back and undo the choices that had been made. But maybe, just maybe, we could find a different way forward. I'm having a barbecue at my place this weekend, I said, the words coming out before I'd really had a chance to think them through. It was an impulse born not of obligation, but of a sudden, quiet desire for peace. My grandmother will be there. You should come, if you want to. A flicker of surprise, then a wave of profound, undisguised gratitude washed over his tired face. It was the most honest emotion I had seen from him in decades. I'd like that, Alex, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'd like that very much. He gave me a small, hesitant nod, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I was left standing there, the buzz of the conference fading into the background, a sense of quiet closure settling over me. I finally understood that true victory wasn't about proving someone else wrong. It was about building a life so strong, so authentic, so true to yourself, that their opinion, whether it was praise or condemnation, no longer had the power to define you or to break you. The barbecue wouldn't fix everything. The wounds were too deep for a single afternoon of burgers and conversation. But it was a start. It was a new foundation, being laid not on the smoking ruins of the past, but on the quiet, hopeful ground of a possible future. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your family and your own values? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.